on the day they laid the young K9 to rest. The commander's voice cracked over the radio. Unit dismissed. Chairs scraped. Boots turned. Handlers led their partners away. Only one old yellow lab in a black memorial vest refused to move. She leaned toward the glass coffin, nose fogging the lid. At the end of her leash, retired handler Joel Turner felt it tighten and knew this was not disobedience, but a message he had tried hard not to hear. The house sat at the end of a quiet county road, just past the last mailbox and the sagging wire fence. Joel Turner liked that it never tried to impress anyone. Weathered siding, an old ramp built when his knees went bad, a crooked porch swing that complained in the wind. Most mornings, the place felt steady. Lately, though, it felt like someone else was awake before him. He noticed it first in the hallway by the back door. One boot, the left one, kept ending up turned sideways, toe pointing toward the yard. Joel was sure headlined both of them neatly against the wall. Head straighten it. Walk away. Come back after coffee. And there it was again, slightly askew, as if nudged by something that did not bother with the right. There was a faint sound he could not quite name, barely louder than the hum of the fridge. A soft rhythm near the baseboards at night. Then nothing when he held his breath to listen. Once, as he lay in his recliner with the television off, he felt the vibration of it come through the floorboards into his heels, as if the house exhaled and then went still again. In the mudroom, the entry rug had developed a shallow hollow along one edge, exactly the size of a curled body. Joel smoothed it with his sock, pressing the fibres flat. By the next evening, the dip had returned, pressed into the faded pattern in the same crescent. It looked like the outline of waiting. He told himself it was just where he stood to take off his coat. Near the sliding glass door, a smudge kept reappearing at the same height on the pane. Joel cleaned it with vinegar until the glass squeaked beneath the cloth. The outside field reflected sharp and clear. 2 days later, a cloudy print was back, oval and faint, as if something warm had leaned there, breathing lightly against the cold morning. His body began keeping score before his mind did, knees twinging at the same hour each dawn, chest tightening whenever he passed the hook where an old black vest still hung. He would feel a prickle at the back of his neck when the house grew too quiet, the way he once felt driving past turned out ditch lights on midnight patrol. He would stop, glance around the empty rooms, then shake himself. Twice in 1 week he circled the living room, checking windows and locks he already knew were secure. The second time, he laughed under his breath at his own restlessness and called it habit. He was alone out here. The only tracks in the gravel were his trucks and the postal carriers. Still, that odd sense of company stayed with him, like someone standing just outside the corner of his vision. On a grey Thursday, he woke before the alarm to the distinct impression that something in the house had just risen to its feet. The air felt newly stirred, carrying a trace of outside damp, though every door was shut. Joel sat up slowly, listening to the quiet. Nothing moved. Yet he could not shake the feeling that whatever had been holding watch all these years had slipped back into place, waiting for him to notice. The call from town came while coffee still steamed in his chipped blue mug. The sheriff's voice was softer than Joel remembered from the days of shared graveyard shifts. They spoke about the funeral first, about the glass-sided casket and the field the department had chosen behind the old armory. Only near the end did the sheriff clear his throat and ask if Joel might bring her, too, if she was up to it. He turned his eyes toward the mudroom before answering, though nothing stood there but coats and boots. "She still moves pretty well," he said, careful to keep his own voice steady. The request made sense. Folks in the county had started expecting to see that pale shape at ceremonies and community events. Still, something in him resisted. Funerals had taken enough from that house already. When he finally opened the bedroom door, she was waiting at the far end of the hallway, positioned exactly on the hollowed spot in the rug, ears slightly lifted, head tilted, body already angled toward the back door. Pale yellow fur caught the thin winter light, and the old black vest with the white stitched M patch hung from a hook above her like a memory that had not decided whether to rest. He told himself he was imagining the new pattern. Yet over the next 3 days, he noticed it repeating. Just before dawn, she would pad to the sliding glass door and stand there, nose close to the glass, but not touching, looking out across the field beyond the fence. Her tail stayed low, barely moving, as if she were counting something invisible in the open distance. That same stretch of grass had once been nothing to him but plenty of mowing. Now his gaze followed hers, landing on an almost level patch beside the hedgerow. The field behind the armory sloped in a similar way. He realized it was roughly where the casket would rest, under a tent and a grey sky, while the line of uniforms stood in painful silence. His hand tightened around his mug. The first time, she brushed past his knee to nudge the closet door. He thought she wanted an old toy, but her nose bypassed the crate of tennis balls and settled instead against the worn handle of his dress uniform case. She gave a low, brief sound in her throat, then stepped back, eyes focused on him, waiting. Joel pretended not to understand and reached for her leash instead. In town, the station buzzed with muted activity. Black bands wrapped around badges, carnations in buckets near the briefing room door. She walked at his side through the narrow hallway, paws silent on tile, vest straps snug against greying shoulders. Younger deputies, some of whom had never worked nights with him, still straightened unconsciously when they saw her, like children caught talking in church. That evening, after they returned, she went back to the sliding glass door without prompting. This time she pressed her nose firmly against the pane, leaving a clear oval smudge exactly where he had wiped it clean the day before. Outside, the field lay dark and ordinary. Inside, Joel stood halfway between the closet and the back door, caught between dress blues and worn flannel, wondering what kind of goodbye she thought they were preparing for. Before the vest ever carried an M, it had belonged to another partner, a darker-coated worker who ran at Joel's side through rain, dust, and flashing blue light. Those years blurred now, a string of calls and long roads. But he remembered the feeling of a strong body at the end of a lead, pulling toward whatever needed finding. They had covered county fairs, flood zones, even that ice storm that knocked out power for days. Back then, the unit was smaller, their trucks older, their gear held together with duct tape and stubborn pride. Rook arrived later, a brindle bundle of focus and drive that required 2 hands on the line and a constant eye. Maple came in between, a pale yellow rescue with soft eyes and a steadier heartbeat. Loaned at first as a comfort animal after a particularly hard winter took one of their own. The brass had not known what to do with a creature who wanted both to work and to lean into sobbing shoulders. Maple settled it herself by doing both. She learned the difference between the clipped command voice Joel used on searches and the quiet tone he used in hospital corridors. She could sweep a school hallway for hidden pills, then lie down beside a shaken teen without missing a beat. When Joel's first partner finally slowed, it was Maple who held the household together. The old worker's bed had been set beside the heater, stiff legs tucked under a blanket. Maple, younger then, would patrol the hallway between that bed and the door, pausing to check the rise and fall of a tired chest before returning to her post. Even then, she understood that on watch meant more than standing guard against strangers. Retirement did not come easy for Joel. The day he hung his duty belt on the back of a chair instead of his hip, his shoulders felt too light and his hands too empty. Maple paced the living room for a week, shadowing him as he tried to learn the rhythm of daytime television and small-town errands. They both looked like they had been parked in the wrong driveway. The department began asking for Maple at community events even after Joel turned in his badge. Reading hours at the library, drug awareness talks at the middle school, a fundraiser for a firefighter's family. Joel would stand at the back while Maple moved from person to person, collecting gentle hands like she was counting heads. She was aging, but the work, softer though it was, still gave her purpose. Rook and his handler, a younger deputy named Evan, entered the picture just as Maple's muzzle started to silver. Rook was all sharp lines and restless energy, a Dutch shepherd with colouring like storm clouds over ploughed fields. Maple met him once at a training day on the edge of town. While Rook lunged happily at a tug toy, Maple sniffed him over, then stepped back with a look Joel could only call approval. When the call came weeks ago about Rook's final shift, the details were spare but sufficient. A pursuit that ended badly on a slick rural road, a rolled cruiser, a handler in the hospital, a partner who had not made it home. Joel drove out that night and stood across the street from the station, watching lights flicker in the briefing room. Maple sat beside him in the truck, staring fixedly at the bay doors. The department asked soon after if Maple could serve as a presence at the memorial. Not as a replacement, never that, but as a kind of bridge, a living reminder of the work and the years that stitched one generation of the unit to the next. Joel agreed with his mouth, while something deep in his chest folded its arms. They had already buried too many uniforms, too many collars. He wasn't sure he had it in him to stand through another. In the days leading up to the funeral, Maple's pace changed. She moved slower on the stairs, but more quickly toward any sound of the radio crackling in the kitchen. At night, Joel would wake to feel her breath warm against his palm, her head resting there as if she had been checking that he was still in place. It was as if both of them knew they were heading toward a day that would reopen more than one old wound. The morning rehearsal took place under a low sky behind the armory, the same field the department used for summer picnics and charity softball games. Now, spray-painted lines marked where the canopy would stand, where the honour guard would form, where the glass-sided casket would rest. Joel watched from the edge as younger handlers walked their partners through slow, solemn turns, boots crunching softly in the frost-bitten grass. Maple stood by his left leg, vest snug, ears tipped forward. Each time the formation moved, she shifted with them, though no one had given her a command. Her gaze kept returning to the small rectangle of ground where the casket base would sit. When the bugler practiced a few hesitant notes, her body vibrated once, a faint trembling that travelled from shoulders to tail before she settled again. Afterward, inside the armory, someone had set up a row of framed photographs on a long table. Unit shots, training days, candid snapshots of wet fur and lolling tongues. Rook's picture sat in the centre beneath a folded flag, brindle coat shining, head cocked as if listening. Maple approached on her own, nails ticking softly on concrete, and pressed her nose near the glass until fog bloomed briefly over the younger dog's face. That night at home, she disappeared down the hallway while Joel wrestled his uniform from its garment bag. He found her in the bedroom, not on her own bed, but lying lengthwise across the foot of his. Her front paws hung just over the edge, positioned exactly where his boots would land when he sat to lace them. When he moved closer, She lifted her head and thumped her tail, inviting him to try. He sat, feeling the familiar ache in his knees, and reached for the polished leather. Maple slid one paw onto the instep of his right boot and left it there, steady, as he tightened the laces. It was not a clingy gesture. It felt more like a deliberate pinning, as if she were holding him to the promise he had made when he told the sheriff they would be there. He paused, hand on the knot, and met her eyes. Sleep came in fragments that night. Each time he woke, Maple had changed positions. Once she lay against the bedroom door, as if barring an exit. Another time she occupied the hallway again, curled over the hollow in the rug like a seal on a familiar rock. Near dawn, he found her stationed at the sliding glass door, breath clouding the pane in a steady rhythm, watching the first thin light touch the field. On the morning of the funeral, as he reached for her vest, Maple trotted past him instead and returned carrying a scarred length of leather between her teeth. It was one of Rook's old training leads, left at Joel's place after a joint exercise months ago and forgotten in a corner of the mudroom. She laid it carefully at his feet, then stepped back, ears tilted in expectation. Joel picked up the lead, feeling the stiffened handle where a younger hand had once gripped through rain and sweat. The leather smelled faintly of dust and something sharper, the ghost of working days. He could have called it coincidence, random scavenging. But Maple's gaze stayed fixed on his face, not the lead, and there was a question there that made denial feel small. He looped the old lead over his arm, more ritual than necessity, and fastened Maple's vest around her chest. The white M-patch stood out against the black like a handkerchief in a sober suit. At the door, she hesitated, glancing once back down the hallway toward the bedroom and the hollowed rug, then toward the waiting truck. It felt, strangely, like she was saying goodbye to the house before they had even left the driveway. By the time they reached the field behind the armory, the sky had settled into a solid sheet of cloud, bright but without warmth. Rows of folding chairs faced the glass-sided casket, which rested low on its stand. White flowers arranged in careful banks around it. A large photograph of Rook, mounted and framed, sat atop the case near a neatly folded flag. The air smelled of damp earth and cut grass, with a faint undertone of diesel from idling cruisers. The unit formed up early, handlers in dark uniforms standing beside their partners. German shepherds and a Belgian Malinois lined the front, tails low, bodies quiet, ears alert to every shifting sound. Maple walked in at Joel's side but broke step slightly as they approached, her attention drawn not to the other animals, but to the casket itself. She slowed, then stopped altogether, gaze locked on the brindle shape visible through the glass. Rook lay on his side beneath a white cloth that covered most of his body, leaving only his head and one paw visible. His face was peaceful, muzzle resting on a small folded blanket worn pale from years of use. The exposed paw, brindled and strong even in stillness, had been placed carefully, pads facing inward as if mid-step. Maple's chest rose and fell in a tight rhythm as she took in the sight. An officer from a neighbouring town directed Joel to a place just behind the primary line, near the end of a row of chairs reserved for family. "Good to have you here." "Lieutenant," the man murmured, using Joel's old title out of habit. Joel inclined his head, too aware of the weight of eyes on Maple. Some looked grateful. A few, red-rimmed and tight-mouthed, seemed to bristle at the presence of any living symbol, while grief still felt raw. As people arrived, the wind picked up enough to flutter the petals of the white arrangements. Maple's behaviour shifted with it. She stood, sat, then stood again, scanning the edges of the crowd, nose lifting as if testing the air for something more than weather. Twice she stepped forward an inch, stopped by only the lightest pressure of Joel's fingers on her lead. It was not restlessness, he realised, but the strain of someone held just off their proper post. Near the start of the service, a county official approached Joel with an apologetic look. "We're going to need you a bit farther back once the honour sequence begins," the man said quietly, eyes flicking toward Maple. "We don't want any unexpected movements near the casket during the folding." Joel nodded, understanding the protocol, but the words still landed like a small rebuke between his ribs. Maple's ears flattened briefly, as if she had caught the tone if not the language. When the chaplain began to speak, voices dropped to a hush that seemed to press the entire field into stillness. Maple lay down at Joel's feet, front paws extended, body angled toward the casket even from their moved back position. During the reading of Rook's service record, she lifted her head exactly 3 times. At the mention of the first big search, at the flood response, and at the words "line of duty," each lift was small but precise, like a witness acknowledging facts in a quiet courtroom. The external crisis arrived, not in the form of sirens, but through something smaller and more mundane. A gust of wind caught one side of the canopy just as the bugler prepared to play, snapping a loose tie and sending a corner of canvas flapping wildly over the casket. People in the front row flinched. Petals scattered across the glass lid. A photographer stumbled backward, almost colliding with a chair holding Rook's flag-draped tribute items. Maple surged to her feet before Joel did, body moving instinctively toward the disturbance. He tightened his grip on the lathe, heart hammering, and called her name under his breath. She checked herself mid-stride but remained pointed toward the casket, muscles bunching under the black vest, eyes fixed on the figure inside the glass rather than the flapping canvas. It felt, in that moment, as if she were holding two opposing impulses in place, to rush in and to stay where she had been stationed. Volunteers quickly secured the canopy tie, and the service continued. But something had shifted inside Joel. He realized what had been nagging him since the first mention of the funeral. Maple was not simply attending. She was trying to work. She had read the field, the arrangement, the tension in every hunched shoulder, and placed herself mentally where she believed she belonged at the side of the fallen. The ceremony, with all its rules and distances, was pulling her away from that point. As the final remarks approached, the chaplain's voice grew softer, and Joel's thoughts grew louder. He knew what would come next. The last call over the radio, the command to the unit, the formal dismissal. Tradition said that once those words were spoken, the living turned away, whether their hearts were ready or not. Standing there with Maple's lead wrapped around his hand, Joel felt the familiar, unwelcome tightening in his lungs. He was not sure he could force his feet to move when the time came, and he had no idea what Maple would choose. The radio on the small table crackled to life as the chaplain stepped back, crackle echoing faintly through the portable speakers set up near the chairs. Dispatch called Rook's unit number once, twice, 3 times, voice steady and kind. Each unanswered call seemed to lengthen the space between breaths. Maple's ears flicked with each repetition, as if she were tallying them against every shift she had ever stood through. When the final end of watch came, a hush fell so complete that even the breeze seemed briefly to hold still. The commander stepped forward to the microphone, shoulders squared, voice carrying across the field. He acknowledged family, colleagues, community. Behind him, the row of working partners stood like carved figures, their handlers at attention. Maple, though placed slightly apart with Joel, rose to her feet as if pulled up by the same invisible string. Unit. Dismissed. The commander finally said, words crisp and formal. It was the moment designed to release everyone from posture and duty, to allow shoulders to sag and hands to reach for tissues. The line of handlers began to turn away in slow unison, a practiced, dignified withdrawal from the casket. Chairs creaked as people rose. Gravel shifted under careful footsteps. Joel took a half step with them, his body following old training. At his side, Maple did not move. The lead went taut between his hand and her collar, not from any pull forward, but from the refusal of her weight to follow. She stood anchored, front paws planted in the damp grass, gaze locked on the glass coffin. The black vest seemed suddenly too small for the breadth of meaning it carried. He murmured her name, a soft cue he had used hundreds of times. Instead of stepping with him, Maple leaned toward the casket, easing to the end of the leads, slack like water finding its level. People nearby began to notice. A few handlers paused mid-turn. A murmur rippled through the line. Joel felt eyes on the back of his neck. The pressure of decorum. The expectation that he would correct her, bring her back into the human pattern. Something in him refused. His fingers loosened on the lead, granting her the small freedom of those remaining inches. Maple used them with deliberate grace, walking forward until her nose came to rest lightly against the glass near Rook's face. The contact was gentle, almost reverent, leaving a soft oval of fog that slowly widened and then faded. Her tail hung still, neither tucked nor lifted, as if all her energy had been poured into that single, simple act. A photographer, caught between duty and respect, lowered his camera. The murmurs quieted. The other dogs in the unit shifted subtly. A paw here, a lowered head there, but none broke position. It was as if they recognized that one among them had been granted a different assignment. Maple stayed where she was, breath clouding the glass in slow, even pulses, refusing the dismissal that had just been spoken over the gathered living. Evan, Rook's handler, moved without seeming aware he had started, pale from weeks in and out of hospitals, arms still in a sling beneath his dress jacket. He stepped away from his family and approached the casket from the opposite side. His eyes were locked, not on the coffin but on Maple. When he reached the glass, he placed his good hand flat against it, directly across from her nose. For a heartbeat, man, living worker, and fallen partner formed a quiet triangle of intention. Joel watched as emotion rearranged the young deputy's face. Grief and gratitude and something like release passing through in waves. Maple did not look at him. She remained fixed on Rook, then shifted her gaze an inch to rest briefly on the folded flag near the brindled paw, highlighted by a shaft of thin light. Only then did she step back a fraction, as if acknowledging that her watch at the coffin itself had been seen and understood. The commander did something Joel had never witnessed at a service like this. He stepped back to the microphone, cleared his throat, and spoke again. "Unit," he said quietly. No amplification this time. "Hold." The handlers, who had begun to disperse, stopped and turned back on their own. One by one, they brought their partners to face the casket again, not at rigid attention now, but in a more human circle of presence. The dismissal, it seemed, had been gently rescinded by one old worker who would not turn away. Tears came to Joel's eyes. hot and unexpected. In Maple's simple refusal, he saw not stubbornness, but the truth he had been avoiding. Some bonds did not end at the last call or the folded flag. Some posts could not be abandoned just because the schedule said shift was over. She had been reading the pattern all along, from the hollow in the rug to the smudged glass at home preparing herself. And him, for this one act of standing fast when everyone else stepped back. In the weeks after the funeral, the field behind the armory returned to its usual life. Kids chased soccer balls where chairs once stood, and pickup trucks gathered near the fence during summer games. The only sign of what had taken place was a small marker near the hedgerow, a simple plaque with Rook's name and badge number. Yet whenever Joel drove past, Maple shifted in the back seat, ears tipping toward the turnoff as if checking whether they were stopping. They began visiting on purpose, not only when official ceremonies required it. On quiet afternoons, Joel would park by the old loading ramp and walk with Maple down the same gentle slope they had once approached in dress uniforms. Without tents and folding chairs, the field felt larger, the sky wider. Maple would move ahead until she reached the marker, then slow, circling once before settling beside it with a contented sigh. Other routines changed as well. The department started inviting Maple not just to somber events, but to lighter community gatherings, calling her our memorial girl with a mix of affection and respect. At a spring safety fair, children crowded around to pet her, hands small and careful on her greying fur. Joel watched as she divided her attention between them and the distant shimmer of passing cruisers, honouring both play and the work she had once done. Evan sometimes joined them at the field, his sling replaced by a faint scar along one wrist and a stiffness in his gait. The first time he came alone, without his parents or colleagues, Maple greeted him with a solemn wag, then resumed her station by the marker. He sank onto the grass opposite her, knees pulled up, and spoke in a low voice about new assignments, lingering nightmares, and a guilt that still woke him in the dark. Maple listened, eyes half-lidded, tail brushing the ground in slow strokes like a metronome keeping time. At home, the house's odd unease shifted into something quieter. The boot by the back door no longer wandered. It stayed where Joel placed it. The hollow in the rug remained, but it looked now like a seat permanently reserved rather than a question mark pressed into fabric. When Maple lay there, her body filled the outline perfectly, as if the rug had been shaped by all the unseen watches she had already stood. Joel found himself talking more, not just to her but to the framed photographs that lined his living room shelf. He spoke aloud to faces in uniform, to dogs mid-leap or mid-lick, recounting small victories of the day. A neighbour's fence finally fixed. A lost child found quickly in the supermarket aisle. Evan laughing for the first time during a breakfast at the diner. Maple would lift her head at certain names, eyes brightening at remembered stories. Their walks took on a new pattern as well. Instead of looping only around his own property, Joel began ending their route at the edge of town near the station. Maple would stop beside the memorial wall there, nose hovering just shy of the engraved names, then glance back at him as if to confirm that they were still accounted for. Deputies coming on or off shift would pause to scratch her ears, shoulders relaxing for a moment before the next call. One evening, as the sun dipped low and turned the station windows gold, Joel watched Maple stand between the wall and the parking lot, body oriented toward the road where cruisers rolled out. She was not trying to board any of them. She simply watched them leave, then return, head turning to track each one. It dawned on him that this, too, was part of her new post, witnessing the comings and goings, holding a quiet ledger of lives still on duty. He realized that he, too, had taken up a different kind of watch. Not the adrenaline-lit vigilance of his deputy days, but a slower, deeper noticing, checking on widows at the grocery store, trimming branches that hung low over the road near blind curves, making sure Evan had company on difficult anniversaries. Maple was there for most of it, a pale shadow with a black vest hanging from a hook at home, ready whenever ceremony called again. Their shared rhythm no longer revolved around sirens and shift changes. It moved instead around visits, stories, and the unspoken understanding that some work continues quietly long after the radios go silent. Together, man and animal had found a way to live in the space between grief and duty, where memory did not weigh them down so much as steady their steps. Summer settled over the county with longer evenings and slow W cricket nights. Joel's house, once a place that felt too quiet, now held the gentle hum of visitors. Evan came by to help repair the old porch swing. The sheriff stopped in occasionally with news or leftover pie from some community fundraiser. Each arrival sent Maple trotting to the door, tail swaying, paws sure on the familiar hollow in the rug. The black vest with the white M patch did not hang forgotten. It waited on its hook, ready for the next ceremony, the next school talk, the next time a family needed a steady presence beside a folded flag. Maple no longer needed it to know her role. But when Joel fastened the straps across her chest, her posture shifted almost imperceptibly, spine straightening, gaze sharpening with the calm focus of someone reporting for duty. One late afternoon, they returned from the field behind the armory as the sky turned the colour of old photographs. Maple had spent a long time that day lying between Rook's marker and a small sapling the department had planted nearby, her body bridging past and future without fuss. Now she moved more slowly up the ramp, but with the satisfied heaviness of a worker who knows the shift went well. Joel followed, feeling much the same. In the living room, a new frame had joined the others on the shelf. It held a photograph taken, unofficially, at the funeral. Maple in the foreground, nose gently touching the glass of the low casket. Brooke's brindled form peaceful inside. The line of working partners blurred behind them. In the corner of the image, almost lost in the shallow depth of field, Evan's hand rested on the glass opposite Maple's. The picture held no text, only light, fur, and the quiet geometry of connection. As dusk deepened, Joel opened the sliding glass door to let in the evening air. Maple walked out to the edge of the porch and stood for a moment, nose lifted, taking inventory of the scents the day had left behind. Cut hay from a neighbour's field, the faint tang of distant rain, the familiar human smells of those who had visited. Then she turned back inside, circled once on the hollowed rug, and settled with a soft, satisfied groan. Joel lowered himself into his chair, knees protesting, and let his eyes move from the doorway to the photograph wall, then down to the pale shape at his feet. "We did all right," he said quietly, not sure whether he was speaking to Maple, to Rook, or to the long line of names and faces that had led him here. Maple's tail thumped once in reply, slow and sure. Outside, a cruiser passed on the distant county road, its lights off. Just another car heading home. The sound of its tyres on pavement reached the house as a low, familiar hush. Maple's ears twitched, acknowledging the sound, but she did not rise. For once, her post was here and nowhere else, in a room where watchfulness had finally made room for rest. The last light faded from the yard, leaving the house wrapped in a comfortable dusk. Joel felt no pressing need to check locks or trace strange noises. Whatever had once felt unsettled now lay in its proper place. With Maple's breathing steady beside him and the quiet witness of photographs at his back, he let his eyes close, held by the simple certainty that, after so many long seasons of searching and standing guard, neither of them was keeping watch alone anymore. If this story touched your heart, drop a simple 1 in the comments to let us know you were here. Your support keeps these gentle stories alive. Don't forget to subscribe and stay with us, because the next story might just be the one that finds you when you least expect it.